Hello, and welcome back to another update as we cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. We start out with the latest developments throughout the front line, where we start in the Avdiivka direction, where previously I reported that fighting has taken place here in the forest lines, and the Russians recently made some advancements in this direction, where they've managed to capture parts of the forest patch, and fighting continues within the forest area as well as towards the dacha area and the forest patch here next to it. So we're seeing constant fighting here in the direction of the northeast of Avdiivka, where small Russian assault groups are advancing and assaulting Ukrainian positions in the forest lines, trying to capture the Ukrainian fortifications and establishing their own positions in this direction. We then move up in a northern direction towards Bakhmut, where we have this geolocated footage here, which shows Russian forces using Lancet drones to hit Ukrainian firing positions across the canal line. Based on this, we see that the Russian-Ukraine position here in the west of Bakhmut is that they aren't launching any significant offensive operations by the front line, but they're instead hitting the Ukrainian firing positions from a couple of kilometers away from the front, 5 to 8 kilometers to be exact. And based on this, we see that they are preparing for a future offensive operation by launching these strikes on the backline of the Ukrainian defenses, hitting their firing positions, which will allow more Russian firing positions and assaults to be established across the front and for them to launch attacks. So the current situation is that Ukrainian military capabilities have declined since the last summer, where the Ukrainians launched their offensive. After their offensive, they have reduced the amount of military capabilities they have, especially when it comes to artillery measures, as well as firing positions, armored vehicles, and so on. And based on that, we see that the Ukrainians are currently strained across the front line to adapt and cover all positions across the front, and the Russians are just pressuring the Ukrainian positions all throughout the front line, throughout the central parts and southeastern parts of Ukraine, as well as by the Dnieper River, where the Ukrainians are still attempting to get a proper foothold in the Krinky direction, with no developments there. However, there is a lot of fighting taking place, whether it is the Ukrainians launching attacks on Russian assault groups, or the Russians launching these Lancet drone strikes, or their own artillery strikes on Ukrainian firing positions. Both of these grind down the Ukrainian abilities and capabilities to fight this war by destroying their armored vehicles and hitting these positions by the front line. They directly affect the firing capabilities of the Ukrainian armed forces in this section. So we're seeing with these strikes, the Ukrainian ability to hold back further Russian attacks in this direction would decline, and they would need more reinforcements, which there is no report so far of the US or the EU of sending further aid to Ukraine. And the aid that they were sending, all of the packages that were pledged and promised so far, have all been used up. As such, the United States currently does not provide any military aid to Ukraine. So the current Russian strategy here is to hit the back line, the firing positions of the Ukrainian forces across the canal, before launching assault groups towards Klashivka and Andrivka. They are using the same strategy as the Ukrainians did after the first few weeks of their offensive, where they launched smaller assault groups. This forces the Ukrainians to use a lot of artillery on smaller groups rather than on larger groups, which would have more effect. And as such, they are running out of ammunition quicker than if the Russians use larger groups, which would subsequently give more advances for the Russian forces. So we're seeing that the Russians are using this time here where the weather is optimal for offensive operations to only launch small-scale ones with small assault groups to dry up the Ukrainian artillery potential. We then move north in the direction of the Sarishny-Torsk area here to the west of Kreminna, where there has been some footage of Ukrainian FPV drones hitting Russian positions here to the east of Sarishny by the road here. So we're seeing that the Ukrainians not only are reliant on artillery, but they also have a significant amount of drones. The drones are actually built in Ukraine as well as imported from Western countries, where Rishi Sunak recently went to Ukraine to visit Zelensky, where he pledged and promised a 10-year-long £2.5 billion, which corresponds to about $3 to $4 billion of drones to Ukraine over a 10-year period. These drones would be manufactured and produced in Britain. The significant part of this is that it is something that the Ukrainians are heavily reliant on, but the fact that 2.5 billion pounds would be used to produce these for Ukraine and send them over the next 10-year period would give them a reliant source of these drones. Now the question is, why was this announced now? Why not earlier? Why didn't the West provide more drones earlier? The main reason for this is because the industrial capacity to produce these drones aren't made yet. This is why it's a 10-year pledge, because they need to build the factories, they need to increase the production and so on, so that they can provide the necessary numbers for Ukraine. But why not just build them in Ukraine? Because Ukraine already have factories, and based on the information from the multiple large missile strikes and drone strikes on Ukrainian territory over the past days and weeks, we have reports that the main targets of the Russian missile strikes and drone strikes are actually the Ukrainian military industrial complex, which has been significantly weakened over the past missile strikes. We hear reports based on the insider source in the office of the president of Ukraine saying that the military targets of these missile and drone strikes are the Ukrainian positions, military factories building drones, for example, and other military factories. This is why there's been a lot of strikes in Kharkiv, because they have tank factories in Kharkiv. So the focus of these missile strikes are the military industrial complex of Ukraine, but also the airfields being prepared to host F-16s. There are some that are being prepared to host the F-16s because the F-16s are much more difficult to create a runway suitable for it compared to Soviet fighters. Soviet fighters can pretty much fly from any positions on any long straight highway. So the normal roads built in Ukraine can allow Su-24s or older Soviet jets to fly from these roads. Compare that to F-16s, they need a specialized runway in an airfield to properly fly from these airfields. So some Ukrainian airfields are being prepared. These are all in western Ukraine. So the Russian missile strikes hitting western Ukraine are all likely on these airfields, where they also host Soviet fighter jets that are being used to launch missiles on Russian positions. Positions of such airfields are located mainly here in western Ukraine by Ivano-Frankivsk and the Khmelnytsky regions of Ukraine here in the west, close by Lviv. We hear, according to these reports, that the repair and technical hangars were also destroyed, which were built for the F-16s. This will cause a delay in the process of Ukraine's readiness to use Western fighters. All of this is a result of these missile strikes that we have seen over the past few weeks and months. But most significantly is that the reduction of supplies from the West for specifically the air defense and also Russian strikes on Ukrainian air defense systems have significantly reduced the ability of the Ukrainian air defense to shoot down Russian rockets and deal with the Russian missile strikes across the country. This is documented by Ukrainian Ministry of Defense themselves. We see here this post from the 6th of August 2023, so this is a little more than 4 months ago. Based on this, we see that Russians unleashed large missile attack targeting Ukrainian infrastructure, of which 13 out of 20 Kh-101 and Kh-555 cruise missiles were shot down, 17 out of 20 Caliber cruise missiles, 0 out of 3 Kinzhals, and 27 out of 27 Shahed kamikaze drones were claimed to be shot down by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. Comparing this to just yesterday, 7 out of 12 Kh-101 have been shot down, 0 out of 3 Shahed drones, 0 out of 13 ballistic missiles, 0 out of 6 Kinzhals, 0 out of 6 Kh-22, 1 out of 6 Kh-59 were reported to be shot down based on the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. So this is a significant decrease. Counting the amount of missiles and how many were shot down, 8 were shot down, while 5, 8, 21, 27, 33, 38 hit their targets, allegedly. So with this, we see that the majority of missiles hit their targets, while a small minority are getting shot down. This is a complete collapse. Comparing this to back then, They claim that they shut down 13 out of 20, 17 out of 20, 27 out of 27. That is the vast majority being shut down in comparison. So the Ukrainian air defense has completely collapsed. Either the Ukrainians choose to not shoot down these missiles, or they are simply not capable of doing it. Which is more likely? Would they just allow these missiles to hit their targets all across Ukraine if they had the capabilities to stop that? Of course not. So with this, we see that the Ukrainian air defense is completely collapsed due to the lack of ammunition, or simply the air defense being shot by Russian missiles. And this is a huge issue for Ukraine, because if this continues, the Russians can use their own airplanes for close air support. It's not the Stingers that are the biggest issue for the Russian Air Force, it is these air defense systems. If the Russians are able to use their air force in close air support without fearing being shut down, then this nature of the war will completely switch, and Ukraine will simply be completely outmatched, because the Russian Air Force at full power is not something that they would want to see. Finally, in the Sinkivka direction, here by Petropavlivka as well, there's this relocated footage, yet again showing Russian artillery hitting Ukrainian firing position behind the front line, a couple of kilometers from the front line. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.